"You are not welcome at our family ranch. Stay away, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." That was the text message my father sent me exactly 2 minutes after my plane landed in Montana. I stared at the screen, the autumn sunlight filtering through the airport windows, and felt a slow smile spread across my face. He thought he was banning his broke, worthless daughter from crashing the family reunion. He had absolutely no idea he was texting the woman who owned every single acre of that land. I picked up my phone and made a call to my property manager. "Robert, please revoke all access codes for the Harrison family effective immediately. Gates lock at midnight. Vehicle passes expired as of now. My name is Elena Harrison, and at 34 years old, I'm the CEO of Summit Properties Group, a real estate investment firm that specializes in acquiring distressed agricultural properties across the western United States. But to my family, I'm just the daughter who ran away at 19 because I refused to marry the 58-year-old cattle baron who promised to save our failing ranch with his money. Today, I'm returning to Meadowbrook Ranch, the 2,000-acre property where I spent my childhood working like a servant, while my siblings enjoyed every privilege. I'm not coming back to beg for acceptance. I'm coming back to collect what's mine, and to watch them realize that the ground beneath their feet belongs to me. Before I tell you what happened when the ranch foreman whispered 3 words that made my mother go pale, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been the family outcast who became the one in control. The sliding doors of the regional airport opened, and the crisp Montana air hit my face like a baptism. I had dressed carefully for this moment, not in the designer suits I wore to boardroom meetings in Denver or Seattle, but in worn Levi's jeans, a simple flannel shirt, and broken-in leather boots. To anyone watching, I looked like I'd just rolled in from a long drive, tired and ordinary. But the details told a different story. The vintage Rolex on my wrist was worth more than the truck my father drove. The leather duffel bag slung over my shoulder was handmade Italian craftsmanship. My family had never understood the difference between expensive and valuable. They only knew big and loud. I climbed into my rental truck, a deliberate choice, a basic Ford F-150, nothing flashy, and started the hour-long drive toward Meadowbrook Ranch. The landscape rolled past, golden fields giving way to pine forests, the Rocky Mountains standing sentinel in the distance. Every mile brought back memories I'd tried to bury for 15 years. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my father, Marcus Harrison. "I mean it, Elena. This is our celebration. The mayor is here. Congressman Whitmore is here. We're announcing the Harrison Legacy Foundation. You'll embarrass us with your presence. Stay in whatever cheap motel you're hiding in." I looked at the message and laughed, a sound that echoed in the empty truck cab. The Harrison Legacy Foundation. I knew exactly what that was. Another scam, another desperate attempt to appear legitimate while extracting money from wealthy donors. My father had been running variations of this con for 20 years, always staying just one step ahead of consequences. But not anymore. Not on my land. As I approached the ranch gates, I could see the transformation. White tents were erected across the main lawn. Catering trucks lined the service road. A temporary stage had been built near the old barn, draped with banners that read, "Harrison Legacy Foundation, Building Tomorrow's Leaders." There were easily 300 guests milling about in their Western formal wear, bolo ties and pearl snap shirts, designer cowboy boots that had never seen real dirt. The main ranch house stood proud on its hill, a sprawling log and stone mansion that had been in the family for 3 generations. Or so they told everyone. The truth was darker. My grandfather had lost the property in a poker game in 1987. It had changed hands 4 times since then, with my father leasing it back under increasingly desperate terms. When the last owner died without heirs 2 years ago, the property went into probate and then auction. That's when Summit Properties Group acquired it. That's when I acquired it, for pennies on the dollar, buying the debt and the deed before my family even knew it was for sale. I pulled up to the main gate, where a young security guard stood checking a clipboard. He was probably 19, a local kid hired for the day, trying to look official in a borrowed uniform. He held up his hand as I slowed to a stop. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, polite but firm. "This is a private event. Family and invited guests only. Can I see your invitation? I don't have an invitation, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm family. He looked down at his clipboard, squinting at the list. What's your name? Elena Harrison. His eyes widened slightly. He keyed his radio. Mr. Harrison? I have someone here claiming to be Elena Harrison. Should I? The radio crackled with my father's voice, sharp and angry. Absolutely not. She is not on the list. She is not family. Turn her away immediately. If she causes trouble, call the sheriff. The guard looked uncomfortable. He was just a kid doing a job, caught between following orders and basic human decency. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm going to have to ask you to turn around. I could have told him the truth right then. I could have shown him the deed to the property sitting in my glove compartment. But that would ruin everything. I needed them to underestimate me. I needed them to believe they'd won. Can I at least park somewhere nearby? I asked, making my voice small and defeated. I drove a long way. I just want to see the ranch from a distance, for old time's sake. The guard's expression softened. There's a public overlook about half a mile down the road. You can see the whole valley from there. I'm really sorry, ma'am. It's okay, I said, putting the truck in reverse. You're just doing your job. I drove to the overlook, a scenic pullout that tourists used for photographs. From this vantage point, I could see the entire property spread out below me. The main house, the guest cottages, the renovated stables, the meadows where cattle used to graze before my father sold off the herd to pay gambling debts. I pulled out my phone and opened the property management app. With a few taps, I could see every security camera on the ranch. I could control every electronic lock. I could monitor every utility meter. I watched my family on the screens, tiny figures moving across the lawn like pieces on a chessboard. There was my mother, Patricia Harrison, in her turquoise western gown, with silver conchos, her blonde hair teased into an architectural wonder. She was holding court near the main tent, showing off to a group of society ladies who were too polite to tell her that her jewelry was costume, not custom. There was my father, shaking hands with the congressman, his belly straining against his leather vest, his face red from too much whiskey and too many lies. And there was my brother, Tyler, the golden child who could do no wrong. He was 28 now, handsome in that entitled way that comes from never facing real consequences. He stood next to his wife, Brittany, a former pageant queen who had married him for the ranch she thought he owned. I watched them for a long moment, these people who shared my blood but not my values. Then I made a phone call to Robert Chen, my property manager, and the man who'd been running Meadowbrook Ranch for the past year. Robert, I'm here, I said. Are the preparations complete? Yes, Ms. Harrison, he replied, his voice professional and calm. All staff have been briefed. The documentation is ready. Local law enforcement has been notified of the situation and will be on standby. The transition team is in place. Good. I'm going in at sunset. Let's give them their celebration. Let them think they've won. And then, at exactly 8 o'clock, when they're cutting the ribbon on their fake foundation, I want you to cut the power to the entire ranch. Understood. All systems will go dark at 8 sharp. And Robert, when the power comes back on, I want every screen in that house, every monitor in those tents, to show one thing. The deed, he said, a smile evident in his voice. The deed, I confirmed. I settled in to wait, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, watching my family celebrate on land they didn't own, with money they didn't have, surrounded by people they were actively deceiving. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger sister, Madison. Unlike Tyler, Madison had always been kind to me, in her own way. She was 25 now, trying to navigate the impossible space between family loyalty and basic decency. Elena, please don't do anything dramatic. Dad's been planning this for months. Just give him this one night, for old time's sake. I stared at the message, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Madison didn't know. She couldn't understand what old times really meant for me. She'd been 8 years old when I left. She remembered a big sister who suddenly disappeared, not understanding that I'd been thrown out like trash. I texted back, "Don't worry, Maddie. I'm not going to ruin anything. Just watching the sunset. Hope you're having a good time. It wasn't a lie. I wasn't going to ruin their event. I was simply going to end it. And there's a difference between destruction and revelation. The sun continued its descent, and I watched my family's celebration reach its peak. The band started playing. The champagne started flowing, and I started my truck, heading back toward the ranch gates, ready to claim what was mine. But before I tell you what happened when I walked through those gates and my mother tried to have me physically removed, let me ask you to hit that subscribe button and share this video. This story is about standing up for yourself when your own family tries to tear you down. And if that resonates with you, I need you to stick around for what happens next. The security guard at the gate was different now. The young kid had been replaced by someone older, someone I recognized. Jake Morrison had worked on the ranch when I was a teenager, back when we actually ran cattle instead of scams. He'd been one of the few people who treated me like a human being instead of free labor. When my truck pulled up to the gate, he stepped out of the guard shack with a clipboard, his weathered face settling into professional neutrality. Then he saw me through the windshield, and his eyes widened. "Elena?" he said, his voice uncertain. "Elena Harrison?" "Hi, Jake," I said, rolling down my window. "Been a long time." He looked at his clipboard, then back at me, confusion written across his features. I have orders not to let you in. Your father was very clear," he said. "I know what he said, Jake, but I need to ask you something. Who's been signing your paychecks for the past year?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Your paychecks, the ones that pay you to work ranch security. Who signs them?" I get direct deposit from Summit Properties Group. They took over management of the ranch about a year ago. Mr. Chen runs everything now." "Robert Chen," I said, nodding. "Good man. Works for me." Jake's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, realization, shock, and finally, a slow grin. "You're kidding me." "I'm really not." I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a leather folder, handing it to him. "That's the deed, Jake. Every acre, every building, every fence post. I bought this place 2 years ago when it went to auction. My family has been leasing it back at my discretion, and as of midnight tonight, that lease expires." Jake opened the folder, his eyes scanning the legal documents. His grin grew wider. "Does Marcus know?" "Not yet, but he's about to. Open the gate, Jake. I'm coming home." He handed the folder back to me and hit the button that swung the heavy iron gates open. As I drove through, he leaned into my window. "For what it's worth, Elena, I'm glad you're back. And I'm glad you're the one in charge. This place, it deserves better than what Marcus was doing to it. Thank you, Jake. And thank you for staying. We're going to need good people when we rebuild this ranch the right way." I drove up the long gravel driveway, my heart pounding against my ribs. The last time I'd driven this road, I was 19 years old. My belongings thrown into garbage bags in the back of a borrowed truck. My mother screaming from the porch that I was dead to them. Now I was driving a vehicle I'd paid for with my own money, toward a house I owned, to face people who thought they could still control me. The parking area near the main house was full of luxury vehicles: Cadillac Escalades, BMW SUVs, even a couple of Teslas. The urban cowboys and society matrons had come to play ranch for the evening, drawn by the promise of rubbing elbows with politicians and maybe getting a tax write-off for donating to the Harrison Legacy Foundation. I parked my basic Ford F-150 at the far end of the lot, deliberately choosing a spot away from the expensive vehicles. I wanted to blend in, to observe before I acted. As I walked toward the main tent, I could hear the band playing a Western swing version of Ring of Fire. The smell of barbecue smoke drifted through the air, mixing with expensive perfume and bourbon. Through the tent opening, I could see my father on the temporary stage, microphone in hand, holding forth about family values and preserving Western heritage. "The Harrison family has been stewards of this land for 3 generations, he was saying, his voice booming with false sincerity. "We believe in hard work, traditional values, and giving back to our community. That's why we're establishing the Harrison Legacy Foundation." I almost laughed out loud. 3 generations. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. He'd told it so many times he probably believed it himself. I made my way around the edge of the crowd, keeping to the shadows. I wanted to see everything before I was seen. I wanted to understand exactly how deep the deception ran. That's when I spotted my mother near the buffet table, holding court with a group of women who were dressed like they'd raided a Western wear store 5 minutes before the event. She was showing off her ring, a massive turquoise and silver piece that she claimed was a family heirloom, but that I knew she'd bought at a pawn shop in Billings for $300. Of course, running a property like this requires such dedication, she was saying, her voice carrying that fake cultured tone she used with outsiders. The upkeep alone is astronomical, but we consider it our duty to preserve this piece of Montana history. One of the women, a rail-thin brunette dripping in diamonds, leaned in conspiratorially. Patricia, I heard the most horrible rumor. Someone said that the property was actually in foreclosure a few years ago. Can you imagine? My mother's smile didn't waver, but I saw her knuckles go white around her champagne glass. Oh, that's just vicious gossip, Diane. You know how small-town people love to tear down successful families? The ranch has been in Harrison hands continuously since 1952. We have the original deed framed in the study. I did laugh then, a soft sound that carried in the momentary lull of conversation. The original deed was indeed framed, in my office in Denver, along with every subsequent deed of ownership, including the one with my signature at the bottom. My mother's head snapped toward the sound, her eyes scanning the crowd. When her gaze landed on me, standing in the shadows at the edge of the tent, her face went through a transformation that would have been comical if it weren't so venomous. The cultured society lady vanished, replaced by the woman who'd once thrown my clothes onto the driveway in trash bags. She excused herself from her group with a tight smile and marched toward me, her heels sinking into the grass with each aggressive step. "What?" she hissed when she reached me, her voice low but vibrating with fury. "Do you think you're doing here?" "Hello, Mother," I said calmly. "Nice party. The barbecue smells delicious. Don't you dare use that tone with me." Her eyes darted around, checking to see if anyone important was watching this interaction. "You were told not to come. You were explicitly forbidden. How did you even get past the gate?" "I drove through it." "That's trespassing, Elena. This is private property. Our property. You have no right to be here." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice conversational, "I have every right. But we can talk about that later. Right now, I'm just here to observe. Don't let me interrupt your fundraising." Her face flushed an ugly red. "You're here to cause trouble. You're here to embarrass us, just like you always do. Well, it's not going to work. Security." She raised her hand, snapping her fingers at a passing guard. "This woman is trespassing. Remove her from the property immediately." The guard, a young man I didn't recognize, looked uncertainly between us. "Ma'am, I'll need to verify." "I don't care what you need to verify," my mother snapped. "I am Patricia Harrison. This is my family's ranch. This woman is not family, and she is not invited. Remove her, or I will have your job." Before the guard could respond, a voice cut through the tension like a blade through butter. "Whoa, Patricia. Is this her? Is this the famous runaway sister?" I turned to see my brother Tyler approaching, a rocks glass of bourbon in one hand, his wife Brittany trailing behind him with her phone already raised, recording the interaction. Tyler had grown into a carbon copy of our father. The same swagger, the same entitled smirk, the same eyes that looked at people and calculated their worth in dollars. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple clothes and worn boots, and his smirk widened. "Elena Harrison, as I live and breathe. You actually showed up. I told Dad you wouldn't have the guts." "Hello, Tyler. You look tired," he said, the word dripping with condescension. "Hard living, I guess. What are you doing these days? Still working that waitressing job in... where was it? Some truck stop in Wyoming?" "I'm in real estate," I said simply. He laughed, a bark of amusement that made several nearby guests turn to look. "Real estate, right. Selling timeshares, showing rent houses. That's cute." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. peeling off several $100 bills. Here, consider it a family loan. Go get yourself a decent hotel room in town, maybe a nice meal. This party is for serious people making serious money. It's not really your scene. He held the money out to me, and I could see Brittany zooming in with her phone, capturing what she thought would be a humiliating moment for the poor relative accepting charity. I looked at the money, then at Tyler's hand, then at his face. "Keep it," I said. "You're going to need it more than I will." His smirk faltered for just a second. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, stepping past him toward the bar setup near the tent entrance, "that I'm not here for handouts, Tyler. I'm just here to watch the show." I walked away from them, hearing my mother's furious whisper and Tyler's confused response. I made my way to the bar, ordered a glass of water, and checked my watch. 7:15 p.m. 45 minutes until the main event. The bartender, a young woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, handed me my water with a sympathetic smile. "Family reunions are always interesting," she said quietly. "You have no idea," I replied, taking a sip. "For what it's worth," she continued, wiping down the bar, "I've worked a lot of events at this ranch over the past few years. The new management is a lot better than the old system. Mr. Chen actually pays us on time and treats us like human beings. Whoever owns this place now, they're doing it right." I smiled into my water glass. "I'll be sure to pass along the compliment." Over the next 30 minutes, I moved through the event like a ghost, observing the elaborate performance my family had orchestrated. The band played, the guests mingled. The barbecue was served on expensive china with Summit Properties Group stamped discreetly on the bottom. My company's catering dishes, being used to serve food at an event my family thought they were hosting. I watched my father work the crowd, promising tax deductions and legacy projects, collecting checks and pledges that would never materialize into anything except money in his pocket. I watched Tyler network with young businessmen, bragging about the family empire he was set to inherit. I watched my mother pose for photographs, always angling herself to show her good side, always making sure her costume jewelry caught the light. And I watched Madison, my younger sister, standing apart from it all, looking uncomfortable in a dress she clearly didn't want to wear, her eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something real in all the performance. When her eyes finally found me, standing in the shadows near the barn, her face lit up with genuine surprise and joy. She excused herself from the group she'd been standing with and hurried over, her heels sinking in the grass. "Elena," she breathed, pulling me into a tight hug. "You came. I didn't think you would actually come." "Hey, Maddie," I said, hugging her back. She felt thinner than I remembered, frailer. "How have you been?" "I've been..." She started, then stopped, her eyes filling with tears. "I've been wanting to talk to you for years. Mom and Dad said you never wanted to hear from us again, that you'd blocked all our numbers." "I never blocked your number, Maddie. I've had the same phone for 10 years. Her face crumpled. "They lied. Of course they lied. Elena, I tried to find you on social media, but your accounts are all private, and Mom said if I contacted you, she'd what? She'd cut me off. No more college tuition, no more support. I'm at University of Montana, studying environmental science. If I lose that..." She wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't try harder." I took her hands in mine. "Maddie, listen to me. You have nothing to apologize for. You were a kid. You're still practically a kid. What they did to you, threatening to cut off your education, that's manipulation. That's control. It's not your fault. But I should have known better. I should have questioned things. The way they talk about you, like you're this horrible person who abandoned us, but you were always good to me. You were the only one who helped me with homework or made me lunch when Mom was too busy with her charity events." "Events like this one?" I asked gently. She looked around at the elaborate party, the expensive tent, the catered food. "Yeah, Dad's been planning this foundation thing for months. He keeps saying it's going to secure our future, that all the right people will see the Harrison name as a force for good. But Elena," she lowered her voice, "some of the things he's saying about the foundation, The promises he's making to donors, they don't add up. I asked to see the paperwork, the bylaws, the nonprofit status, and he got really angry. Said I was questioning his integrity. What did your gut tell you? I asked. That it's all fake, she whispered. That he's running some kind of scam, just like the cattle investment thing 3 years ago and the conservation easement scheme before that. But if I say anything, if I question him, he'll... Madison Harrison. Our mother's voice cut across the lawn like a whip crack. She was stalking toward us, her face a thundercloud. Step away from her right now. Mom, I'm just talking. I said step away. That woman is poison, Madison. Everything she touches turns toxic. She's here to ruin this event, to sabotage our family's reputation out of pure spite. Actually, I said calmly, I'm here because it's a beautiful evening and this used to be my home. This was never your home. My mother spat. A home is for family. You stopped being family the moment you betrayed us. The moment you chose your selfish pride over your duty to this family. My duty was to marry a man older than you, so he'd pay off Dad's gambling debts, I said, my voice level. That's not duty, Mother. That's prostitution with a wedding license. The slap came so fast I barely saw it. My mother's hand connected with my cheek with a crack that echoed across the lawn, drawing the attention of nearby guests. My head snapped to the side, my vision blurring for a moment as pain radiated across my face. The nearby conversation stopped. People turned to stare. Madison gasped, her hand covering her mouth. I slowly turned my head back to face my mother, touching my burning cheek. I could taste blood where my tooth had cut my inner lip. My mother stood there, her chest heaving, her hand still raised, her eyes wild with rage and something else. Fear. Because in that moment, in front of 300 witnesses, including the mayor and a congressman, Patricia Harrison had just committed assault, and the security cameras that I controlled had captured every second of it. I took a breath, steadying myself. I could feel everyone watching, waiting to see what the poor rejected daughter would do. Would I cry? Would I run? Would I strike back? I did none of those things. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it with my thumbprint, opened my email, and drafted a message to Robert Chen with a simple subject line. Accelerate timeline. Execute now. Then I looked at my mother, at her wild eyes and trembling hands, and I smiled. Thank you for that, I said quietly. That's going to make everything so much easier. What are you talking about? She demanded, her bravado faltering. You'll see. In about 90 seconds, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. I walked past her, past Madison, who looked shell-shocked, past the staring guests who were already whispering and pointing. I walked toward the main stage where my father was preparing to cut the ceremonial ribbon for the Harrison Legacy Foundation. He saw me approaching and his face darkened. He whispered something to Tyler, who immediately started moving to intercept me. But they were too slow. Before anyone could stop me, I was climbing the steps to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, my father said into the microphone, trying to maintain his jovial host persona while shooting daggers at me with his eyes. We seem to have an unexpected guest. Security, please escort. The lights went out. Every single light on the entire property went dark simultaneously. The tent lights, the house lights, the decorative string lights in the trees, even the floodlights illuminating the stage. All gone in an instant, plunging the party into complete darkness. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. I heard glass breaking as someone dropped their drink. Then, one by one, emergency lights flickered on. But they weren't the standard backup systems. These were high-powered spotlights, and they were all focused on one thing: the massive LED screen that had been set up behind the stage to display the Harrison Legacy Foundation logo. The screen flickered to life, impossibly bright in the darkness, and displayed a single document that filled the entire 40-foot display. Warranty deed Meadowbrook, ranch property. 2,147 acres in Cascade County, Montana. Grantor, Thomas Mitchell Estate. Grantee, Summit Properties Group, LLC. Purchaser, Elena Marie Harrison, CEO. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 people stood in the darkness, staring at the screen, reading the document that proved my family had been living on land they didn't own, throwing parties they couldn't afford, selling a legacy that wasn't theirs to sell. I walked to the center of the stage, my boots echoing on the wooden platform. Someone handed me a microphone. Robert Chen, appearing from the wings like a stage manager in a perfectly orchestrated play. "Thank you, Robert," I said, my voice amplified across the suddenly silent crowd. "You can bring the house lights back up now." The lights came on gradually, illuminating the sea of shocked faces. The mayor's mouth was hanging open. Congressman Whitmore was staring at the screen, then at me, then at my father, putting the pieces together. My father stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his face the color of old ash. My mother had collapsed into a folding chair, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from watching your carefully constructed world implode. Tyler was just staring at me, his bourbon glass dangling from his fingertips, his wife Brittany frantically typing on her phone, probably trying to verify what she was seeing. And Madison. Madison was crying, but she was also smiling, her hand pressed to her chest, as if trying to keep her heart from bursting. I turned to face the crowd, the microphone steady in my hand. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Elena Harrison, and I'm the CEO of Summit Properties Group. I'm also the legal owner of Meadowbrook Ranch and have been for the past 2 years. Most of you don't know me. My family has made sure of that, telling anyone who asked that I was the troubled daughter who ran away, the black sheep who brought shame to the Harrison name." I paused, letting that sink in. But the truth is, I didn't run away. I was thrown out. At 19 years old, I was given a choice: marry a man 3 times my age to clear my father's gambling debts, or leave with nothing. I chose nothing. I chose freedom over being sold like livestock. And that choice meant my parents erased me from the family story, told everyone I was dead to them. The crowd was utterly silent now, hanging on every word. For 15 years, I built a life from scratch. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through business school. I started my company with a borrowed laptop and a truck I paid for in cash. I specialized in rescuing distressed properties, ranches and farms that families had lost through bad luck or bad decisions. I gave them new life, new purpose. I turned to look at my father. When Meadowbrook Ranch went to auction 2 years ago, after the last owner died and the property went into probate, I bought it. Not out of sentimentality, and not for revenge. I bought it because it was a good investment. A property with incredible potential that had been mismanaged for decades. My father finally found his voice. You've been charging us rent? For our own family ranch?" "No," I said calmly. "I've been letting you live here rent-free while I decided what to do with the property. I've been paying the property taxes. I've been maintaining the infrastructure. I've been covering the insurance. Every utility bill, every repair, every payroll check for the staff, all paid by Summit Properties Group, all paid by me." I pulled out a document folder from the messenger bag I'd left backstage earlier. However, as part of the arrangement, there were terms. Terms that stipulated you could not use the property for commercial purposes without my express written consent. Terms that prohibited you from representing yourselves as the owners of the property. And most importantly, terms that prohibited you from using the ranch to defraud investors or donors. I held up the folder. This is the prospectus for the Harrison Legacy Foundation that my father has been circulating for the past 3 months. It claims the foundation will be headquartered on the family's ancestral ranch. It promises donors access to exclusive events on our private 2,000-acre estate. It sells a legacy that doesn't exist, on land you don't own, for a charitable organization that... I opened the folder and pulled out another document. According to the Montana Secretary of State's office, has never been registered as a nonprofit. This foundation doesn't exist. It's fraud. Congressman Whitmore stood up, his face red. "Marcus, is this true?" My father tried to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The mayor was already walking toward the exit, her assistant scrambling to follow. Other guests were pulling out their phones, some to fact-check, others to call their lawyers. "All donations collected tonight," I continued, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of voices, were collected under false pretenses. As the legal owner of this property, I want to make it clear that I had no knowledge of this event and gave no permission for this property to be used for this purpose. Any representations made by Marcus Harrison or any member of his family about owning or controlling this ranch are categorically false. I looked out at the crowd, at the society ladies who'd been fawning over my mother, at the businessmen who'd been writing checks, at the politicians who'd been lending their credibility to a scam. However, I don't want anyone here to feel they were complicit in fraud. If you donated tonight, you can collect a full refund from my property manager, Robert Chen, who will be set up at the main house. If you wrote a check, please stop payment immediately and contact the Montana Attorney General's office to report potential fraud. There will be no judgment, no blame. You were victims of deception, just like so many others before you. The exodus began immediately. Guests streaming toward the parking area, some angry, some embarrassed, all desperate to distance themselves from the imploding social disaster. Within 5 minutes, the lawn was empty except for my family, the staff, and a handful of security personnel. My father finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled croak. You can't do this. This is our home. We've lived here for... You've been squatting here, I interrupted, on my generosity and my property. But that generosity ended the moment my mother assaulted me in front of witnesses, and you attempted to defraud 300 people using my land. Elena, please, my mother said, standing on shaking legs. We can work this out. We're family. Surely we can come to some arrangement. You're right that we're family, I said, stepping down from the stage and walking toward her. We share DNA. We share history. But you made a choice 15 years ago that severed every other bond. You chose appearances over your daughter's well-being. You chose money over my future. You chose a con man's empty promises over my freedom. I stopped in front of her, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. I gave you chances. For 2 years I let you live here, hoping you'd change, hoping you'd become better people. But tonight you proved that you're exactly who you've always been. So now you have 24 hours to collect your personal belongings and vacate the property. Any assets purchased with funds from tonight's fraudulent fundraiser will be seized as evidence. Any property claimed as family heirlooms will need to be verified against purchase records, which I have access to. You're throwing us out? Tyler said, his voice rising with panic. Where are we supposed to go? I don't care, I said flatly. That's not my problem. You're adults. Figure it out. Brittany stepped forward, her phone still in her hand. You can't do this. This is our home. Tyler was supposed to inherit... Inherit what? I asked. Debt? Delusions? The only thing Tyler was set to inherit was his father's talent for lying and his mother's talent for cruelty. He's welcome to keep both. I turned to Robert Chen. Robert, please work with local law enforcement to ensure the transition is handled properly. I want every item inventoried as it's removed. Nothing leaves this property without documentation. Understood, Ms. Harrison. I started to walk away, heading toward the main house to begin the real work of reclaiming my property, when I heard my father's voice behind me, cracking with desperation. Elena, wait. Please. I'm your father. I'm begging you. We have nowhere to go. No money. No resources. You can't just abandon us. I stopped and turned around slowly. You're absolutely right, I said. I can't abandon you. Because to abandon someone, you first have to have taken responsibility for them. And you abandoned me 15 years ago when you threw me out with nothing. So really, all I'm doing is returning the favor. I walked into the house, leaving them standing on the lawn they'd thought they owned, surrounded by the wreckage of the empire they'd never actually built. But this was just the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. Before I tell you what happened when the sheriff arrived with the fraud investigation team and what I found hidden in my father's office that changed everything, make sure you're subscribed. This story is about to get a whole lot more intense, and you're not going to want to miss a single minute. The morning sun was already burning off the dew when I walked through the main house at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, taking inventory of the space that was truly mine for the first time. The house was silent in that profound way that only comes when you're completely alone in a place that's usually full of noise. My family had left around 2 a.m., loading their personal items into rental trucks with the kind of barely contained fury that comes from having nowhere to direct your rage. Tyler and Brittany had peeled out of the driveway in their leased BMW, shouting threats about lawsuits that would never materialize. My mother had left in tears, clinging to my father, who'd maintained a cold silence throughout the entire packing process. Madison had stayed behind, helping Robert and me document every item that was removed. When her mother demanded she leave with them, Madison had said something I'd never forget. "I'm 25 years old. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. And unlike you, I actually care about the truth." She was asleep now in one of the guest cottages, exhausted from the emotional whiplash of the previous day. But I was wide awake, energized by the possibility of transformation. I stood in my father's office, formerly his office, and looked around at the mahogany desk, the leather chairs, the bookshelves full of unread books chosen for their impressive spines rather than their content. It was a stage set designed to impress visitors, to project an image of success and erudition that had never been real. I started with the desk drawers. The top ones were full of the usual detritus: pens, business cards from people he'd scammed, expired credit cards cut into pieces. But the bottom drawer was locked. I called Robert. "Do you have the keys for the desk in the main office?" "No, Ms. Harrison." Mr. Harrison kept those on his personal key ring. He was quite insistent that no one access that drawer. Of course he was. I hung up and called Jake at the main gate. "Jake, can you bring me a crowbar and a hammer?" 10 minutes later, I was prying open the locked drawer, the wood splintering under the force. When it finally gave way, I pulled out a stack of file folders, each one labeled with a year going back 15 years. I opened the first one, dated from the year after I left, and felt my breath catch in my throat. Inside were letters, dozens of them, addressed to me at the ranch, from colleges I'd applied to, acceptance letters from Montana State University, a scholarship offer from University of Colorado, a financial aid package from Washington State University. I'd never received any of them. All those months when I'd been sleeping in my car, working 3 jobs, convinced that I was too stupid for college because I'd applied everywhere and heard nothing. These letters had been here, hidden in my father's desk, proof that I'd been accepted, that I'd been wanted, that I'd been good enough. I sat down hard in the leather chair, clutching the letters, feeling 15 years of self-doubt and struggle crystallizing into a focused point of absolute clarity. They'd stolen my future. They'd deliberately sabotaged my education because if I went to college, if I built a real life, I wouldn't be available to be sold off to pay their debts. I kept digging through the files. The next folder contained financial documents, deeds to properties my grandparents had owned, small parcels of land that should have been divided among the grandchildren according to their will. Properties that my father had sold without telling anyone, pocketing the money and forging documents that showed the land had been donated to charity. Madison should have inherited a 10-acre parcel in Glacier National Park when she turned 21. It was worth about $200,000 and could have paid for her entire education. But according to these documents, my father had sold it 3 years ago to a developer for $500,000. He'd stolen from all of us. From me, from Madison, from Tyler. Though Tyler was so far gone into the family mythology that he'd probably known and approved. The deepest folder in the drawer was labeled simply, Insurance. I opened it and found something that made my blood run cold. Life insurance policies. On me. My father had taken out 3 separate life insurance policies on me in the 2 years after I left, each one worth $500,000, listing himself as the beneficiary. The policies had lapsed after 10 years for non-payment, but the intention was clear. He'd been betting on me dying young, cashing in on the daughter he'd thrown away. I sat there in that office, surrounded by the evidence of my family's corruption, and I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I felt something colder and more purposeful than anger. I felt the absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. I called my lawyer in Denver. "Mitchell, it's Elena. I need you to start 3 separate legal actions. First, I'm filing a claim against the Marcus Harrison estate to to recover the value of properties that were stolen from the family trust. Second, I'm reporting insurance fraud to the Montana Department of Revenue. Third, I'm requesting a full investigation into all business dealings conducted by Marcus Harrison over the past 20 years. That's scorched earth, Elena, Mitchell said carefully. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Over the next 3 weeks, the full scope of my father's corruption came to light. The state investigators found evidence of fraud going back decades. Fake conservation easements, forged land deeds, embezzlement from multiple charity organizations, and tax evasion on a spectacular scale. The Meadowbrook Ranch scandal became national news. I did a single interview with a financial crimes reporter from the Wall Street Journal, laying out the facts without emotion, providing documentation for every claim. The story ran with the headline, "The Daughter Who Bought Back Her Childhood Home and Exposed Her Family's Decades of Fraud." 3 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom in Helena, Montana, watching my father being sentenced. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s, who looked at Marcus Harrison with the kind of disgust usually reserved for crimes against children. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "you have violated the public trust in ways both numerous and egregious. You have stolen from your own family. You have defrauded charitable organizations. You have exploited the good nature of your community for personal gain. And perhaps most disturbing, you have attempted to profit from insurance policies on your own daughter's life." My father stood with his lawyer, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive suits he used to wear. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his own choices. "The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole before serving at least 8 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims, and you are permanently barred from serving in any fiduciary capacity or position of trust." My mother, sitting in the gallery, let out a sound like a wounded animal. She was facing her own legal troubles, charges of conspiracy and aiding and abetting fraud. Her trial was scheduled for next month. Tyler had managed to avoid criminal charges by turning state's evidence against our father, providing testimony and documentation in exchange for immunity. But his marriage had imploded when Brittany discovered he'd known about the fraud all along and had been planning to use her trust fund to pay off his parents' debts. She'd filed for divorce and returned to California, leaving him alone in a studio apartment in Billings, working at a car dealership to pay his legal bills. Madison was the only one who'd emerged from the scandal with her integrity intact. She'd cooperated fully with investigators, testified honestly about what she'd known and when she'd known it, and had been cleared of any wrongdoing. I'd used some of the recovered funds to set up a trust for her education, making sure she could finish her degree without financial stress. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Montana sunshine. Reporters shouted questions at me, but I ignored them, heading for my truck. Madison was waiting by the passenger door. "Can I ride back to the ranch with you?" she asked. Of course. We drove in silence for a while, the landscape rolling past, the mountains standing eternal and indifferent to human drama. "Thank you," Madison finally said, "for everything. For the trust fund, for telling the truth, for not letting them get away with it. You don't need to thank me, Maddie. You deserved the truth. You deserved better than what they gave you." "We all did," she said softly. "Even Tyler, in a way. They raised him to be just like them, and now he's paying the price." We pulled into the ranch driveway, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Over the past months, I'd been transforming the property, fulfilling the vision I'd had since the day I first bought it. The main house had been converted into administration offices for Summit Properties Group, with space for local staff and visiting executives. The guest cottages had been renovated into housing for a new program I was starting, a ranch training academy for young people aging out of foster care, giving them real skills in agriculture, land management, and sustainable ranching. The old bunkhouse was being rebuilt as a community center, with a commercial kitchen, meeting rooms, and a library. The barn had become a working operation again, with cattle brought in from ethical ranchers who needed grazing land. And on the hill where my father's elaborate monument to himself had once stood, a granite obelisk with the Harrison name, I'd planted an orchard. Apple trees, cherry trees, and pear trees that would bear fruit for generations. feeding people instead of feeding egos. This place looks completely different, Madison said as we walked toward the main house. It looks alive. That's the goal, I said. This land has good bones. It was just being used for all the wrong reasons. Now it's going to serve a purpose that matters. We walked past a group of teenagers working in the garden, learning about sustainable agriculture from one of our instructors. They looked up and waved, their faces bright with the kind of hope that comes from being given a genuine opportunity. Robert Chen met us at the door with a tablet. Ms. Harrison, I have the quarterly reports ready for your review. The ranch is now cash flow positive, and we have a waiting list for the training program that's 3 times longer than our current capacity. Then we'll need to expand, I said. Are the neighboring properties still available? 2 of them are. The Monroe Ranch to the north and the Thompson property to the west. Both are in foreclosure proceedings. Make offers. Fair offers, at market value. No vulture capitalism. If we can help those families stay on their land with better management, that's preferable. But if they need to sell, we'll give them dignity in the transaction. Understood. I walked through the house that had once been a stage set for my family's delusions and was now the beating heart of something real. In my office, the room that used to be my tiny bedroom above the garage, I had created a space filled with light and purpose. On the wall, I'd framed that first college acceptance letter I'd found in my father's desk, next to a photo of myself at 19, dirty and exhausted, sleeping in my car. The contrast was a reminder of how far I'd come, and why this work mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Harrison. I'm writing to you through a friend's phone. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm being sentenced next week, and I wanted to say something before I go to prison. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that you were right about everything, and I was wrong. You were always the strong one, the good one. I just couldn't see it through my own fear and greed. I hope you can forgive me someday, but I'll understand if you can't. Tell Madison I love her. I read the message 3 times, waiting to feel something. Anger, satisfaction, sadness, anything. But I felt nothing except a mild curiosity, like I was reading about someone else's family drama. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed her, and revenge wasn't something I needed anymore. I'd moved beyond both into something better. Indifference born of purpose. 6 months later, I stood at the same courthouse, but this time for a different reason. My mother's sentencing. The judge gave her 5 years, citing her cooperation with investigators and her genuine remorse as mitigating factors. She'd testified against several of my father's associates, helping to unravel a network of fraud that extended far beyond our family. As she was led away in handcuffs, she looked at me one final time. I nodded, a simple acknowledgement that we'd both survived this, even if we'd never be family again. Outside, Madison was waiting with a surprise. I brought someone to see you, she said, stepping aside. Behind her was a woman in her 70s, wearing comfortable jeans and a flannel shirt, her silver hair pulled back in a practical braid. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. Elena, the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I was your grandmother Rose's best friend. I've been trying to find you for 15 years. My breath caught. Grandmother Rose, my father's mother, had died when I was 17. She'd been the only adult in my life who'd shown me genuine kindness, who'd believed in me. I have something for you, Sarah continued, pulling a small velvet box from her pocket. Rose gave this to me 3 months before she died. She made me promise to give it to you when you turned 30, but your family told me you'd died in a car accident. I only learned you were alive when I saw the news stories about the ranch. She opened the box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small sapphire, worn smooth with age. She wanted you to have this, Sarah said. It was her mother's ring, and her mother's before that. She told me you were the only grandchild with the strength to carry on the family's true legacy, not the fake legacy your father was always bragging about, but the real one, the legacy of resilience and integrity. I took the ring with trembling hands. It fit perfectly on my right ring finger. "There's something else," Sarah said. "Rose left you a letter. I've been keeping it safe all these years." She handed me an envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. "To my darling Elena, to be opened when you find your way home." I opened it carefully, reading the words that reached across 15 years and death itself. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then you've survived whatever storm my son has created. I know Marcus. I know his weaknesses, his greed, his willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone for his own ego. By the time you read this, he will have tried to break you, to make you small enough to control. But you are not breakable, my dear. You have iron in your spine and fire in your heart. You come from a long line of women who survive because they were stronger than the men who tried to diminish them. The ranch, the land, the legacy, none of that matters as much as who you become. Build something that feeds people, not egos. Create something that lasts beyond your lifetime, and never ever let anyone make you feel small again. You are loved, you are worthy, and you are going to do magnificent things. With all my heart, Grandma Rose." I folded the letter carefully, tears streaming down my face for the first time in months. Not tears of grief or anger, but tears of recognition. My grandmother had seen me, truly seen me, and had believed in the person I would become. "Thank you," I said to Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for keeping this safe. She believed in you," Sarah said simply. And she was right. 1 year later, Meadowbrook Ranch was featured in a documentary about innovative approaches to sustainable agriculture and youth development. The footage showed teenagers working in the gardens, learning to weld in the fabrication shop, studying environmental science in classrooms built from reclaimed barnwood. The interviewer asked me the inevitable question: "Do you ever regret how things played out with your family? Do you wish it could have ended differently?" I thought about it, really thought about it before answering. "I regret that they made the choices they made," I said. "I regret that they valued money over integrity, appearances over genuine connection, but I don't regret my choices. I don't regret standing up for myself, or telling the truth, or building something real from the ashes of their delusions." "Do you have any contact with them now?" "Madison and I are close. She's thriving at university, studying environmental policy. As for my parents and Tyler," I paused. "They're serving the consequences of their actions. I wish them no harm, but I also don't need them in my life. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of people who refuse to love you back." The documentary ended with footage of the orchard I'd planted, the trees now 3 years old, beginning to bear their first fruit. Kids from the training program were harvesting apples, their laughter carrying on the wind. The final shot was of me standing on the porch of the main house at sunset, looking out over land that had once been a prison and was now a sanctuary. The narrator's voice overlaid the image. Elena Harrison built an empire from nothing, bought back the home that had rejected her, and transformed it into something that serves hundreds of young people every year. But perhaps her greatest achievement is this: she proved that your worth is not determined by your family's approval, but by the integrity of your own choices. I turned off the documentary, sitting in my office as the real Montana sunset painted the sky outside my window. On my desk was a framed photograph of the first graduating class from our ranch training program. 12 young people who'd arrived with nothing and left with skills, confidence, and hope. Next to it was Grandma Rose's letter and the ring that I wore every day. And in my heart was a peace that came from finally, truly coming home. Not to a place, but to myself. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Madison. "Just got accepted to the graduate program at Yale. Full scholarship. I'm going to study environmental law and policy. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to build a life that matters. Love you, sis." I smiled, typing back. "I always knew you would. Go change the world, Maddie. I'll be here, keeping the home fires burning." I walked outside onto the porch, breathing in the cool evening air. Somewhere in federal prison, my father was learning what it meant to have nothing. Somewhere in a minimum security facility, my mother was serving her time, hopefully learning that love cannot be bought or controlled. And here, on this land that my grandmother had loved, that I had reclaimed, that now served a purpose greater than any individual ego, I was building something that would outlast all of us. The greatest revenge I'd learned wasn't destruction. It was creation. It wasn't tearing down the people who'd hurt you. It was building something so beautiful, so purposeful, so genuine that their fake empire looked pathetic in comparison. I'd been the daughter they threw away, the black sheep, the failure. Now I was the woman who owned the ground they'd pretended to stand on, the CEO who turned their stage set into something real, the survivor who thrived. And that, I realized as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, was more than enough. The most important lesson from Elena's story is this: family is not defined by blood, but by respect, support, and genuine love. When the people who should protect you instead exploit you, walking away isn't weakness, it's survival. And thriving after that walk? That's victory. Your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Build your own empire, define your own legacy, and never let anyone make you feel small. If you've ever had to choose your peace over your family's approval, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, that survival is possible, and that the best revenge is living well. Remember, the land beneath your feet matters less than the strength of your spine. And you, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from, you are stronger than you know. Thank you for listening to Elena's story. Now go write your own.